Hello everyone, it's time for our next panel. It's time to come back to your seats.
I won't.
Well, our next panel is Symbols and Society. Our first presenter is Thom Gencarelli from Manhattan College, and he's presenting two-party politics and a two-value orientation meet the 21st century media environment. Why the U.S. finds itself on the edge of a second civil war.
Because of course it is. So this paper, real quickly, is my contribution to a special issue of Etc. on general semantics and politics that I've been working on with Corey Anton. And because we have so many submissions that we couldn't fit them all into a single issue of the journal, we're going to create a book out of it. And I hope that the book will be out in time for the 2024 presidential election here in the States. I don't have time today to give you all of that paper. I'm going to give you the general semantics part of it and leave out the second half, which is the media ecology part of it, which talks about our current media environment and the maelstrom it's creating. So I don't think I'm going out on a limb if I begin by stating the following, that in 2023, general semantics scholars cannot ignore nor understate the significance of the trajectory of global politics, and in particular, US politics, as one of the two most pressing issues of our times, the other, of course, being climate change. Those of us in the US cannot ignore nor understate the fact that it is incumbent upon us to do our collective best to carry out scholarship and make contributions intended to help solve the problems of and rescue ourselves from the depths to which our political discourse, our political decision-making, and our political processes have sunk. Despite the title of my talk, however, the crux of my presentation is not so much about politics in the United States, but about the context of our politics, context that has led to and which is wholly responsible for our present state. To be clear, I do not by context mean the context that is the maelstrom within which we all presently find ourselves, stunned and aghast and witness to some of the most bizarre, the most trying and difficult and even most precarious circumstances that the people in this room have witnessed and been party to in the time that we've all been politically aware and involved. The context to which I am referring is our political and political economic system in the US. And so my talk is about the semantic environment in which political discourse in the US takes place and what has led us to this state of affairs. And it's my intent to make some sense of this system as it has evolved at the federal, the state, and the local level, and to do so by addressing the existence of our political parties. And what is, despite the Greens, the Libertarians, the Right to Lifers, the Working Family Party, and other smaller and rising and falling independent parties and movements, what is a two-party system? Maybe you can see where I'm going here. Needless to say, our present system is not what it has always been. there's no mention of political parties or factions in the US Constitution. Our first president, George Washington, was not affiliated with any party at the time he was elected, nor during the time he served. No, our original two-party system arose from his contemporaries and advisors. Alexander Hamilton, who authored the Federalist Papers and who became the leader of the Federalists, and get this, then the Democratic Republicans, right, Democratic-Republicans, who were led by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. This was followed by the collapse of the Federalist Party, and during the early to mid-19th century, by the splitting of those Democratic Republicans into the Democratic Party and the relatively short-lived Whigs. That's with an H, not like the hair thing, right? The third phase in our political parties is then characterized by the reintroduction of the name Republican, as Abraham Lincoln's Republican Party arose out of the middle of the 19th century in opposition to slavery. And it is at that point in the history of the Democratic and Republican parties, as the two parties that remain predominant to this day, actually begins. Now, of course, that's a great deal of political history in one fell swoop, but I also need to mention four things. The first is that all of the parties covered in that history are characterized by their oppositions. And by this, I mean their opposition to one another. The second is that these oppositions are from the beginning characterized mainly by opposing views about federal versus state power, the power of wealth, and elitism. And that while these particular oppositions remain, we need to add the notions of social conservatism and social liberalism as essential components of the two parties' opposing platforms, starting during the middle of the 20th century. Third, beyond the slave ownership that led to the Civil War, an important shift took place as a result of the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, wherein the Dixiecrats of the South repudiated their party's leadership and support of civil rights for Blacks and African Americans and became Republicans in one of the more bizarre shifts in the history of US politics. And I say bizarre because the Republican Party's political economic platform does not otherwise represent the interests of citizens in what are effectively 8 of the 10 poorest states in our union when measured by per capita income, per capita state spending, poverty rates, per capita personal consumption expenditures, per pupil expenditures in education, and the like. And fourth and finally, abortion came to the forefront with respect to social conservatism when, according to North, and I quote, during his 1972 presidential campaign, Republican Richard Nixon began making out anti-abortion positions as part of a strategy to appeal to Catholic voters and other social conservatives. After Nixon, someone clapping? For that? No, not for that, no. After Nixon won the election, don't clap it. After Nixon won the election and a majority of Catholic votes, Republican strategists then began using the same tactics in Congress, as well as forging coalitions with evangelical groups around opposition to abortion, end quote. My question in the face of all of this is simply, why a two-party system, a system of binary oppositions? Why do we have in both houses of Congress a single aisle that separates two sides and not a system of multiple competing parties? And yes, I realize that a simplistic answer to this question is that we did not, in the framing of our Constitution, choose to pursue a parliamentary style system. But in other words, why do we have and what do we do with a political system that fixates its citizens within a perpetual semantic environment of a two-valued orientation of either or politics and thinking about and deliberating issues? As general semanticists know, the problem with either or thinking is that it forces us into ways of knowing and relating that are by definition limited and limiting. That not only is our human experience in the world fluid, multifaceted, and contradictory, but language and thought and action can and should also be expanded in ways that allow for both end thinking, as well as for the consideration of all of the possible shades of gray, all of the gradations of color between what is otherwise rendered in black and white. Now, these party platforms are not themselves always black and white. A platform is constructed based upon frameworks and statements about and in response to all manner of civic, economic, and social issues. And there are, within the parties themselves, these are disputed and contentious and contended. For instance, immigration policy is a matter of great urgency, it seems. To say, however, that the Democratic or Republican Party has an agreed upon stance with regard to immigration is not true. Rather, it is something that must be hammered out within each party as a compromise before we can move on and attempt to bring a bipartisan compromise to law. In the meantime, those of you who are not from the US have, of course, a basic understanding of the defining features, the basic tenets and philosophies of our two parties. They range from matters as simple as who is a conservative versus who is a progressive, to who is the party of business and industry versus who is the party of those in need. And on this last point, I'll also acknowledge that centrist Democrats who have come to be regarded as neoliberals, which is to say representatives of business and industry at the same time they claim to speak to and represent those in need. Well, this is a relative new fly in the ointment. Given all that I've said so far, however, I need to add this, that the semantic environment in which political life is enacted in the United States in 2023 has changed. And in relatively recent years, it's changed in an exceptionally unsettling and I would argue wholly debilitating way. And again, I don't have time to talk about the media environment, the media culture that has that exacerbated this change. And so let me just finish on the general semantics note with a slight addition. Because what thinking about all of this brought me back to is a book that I was introduced to and read quite a few years ago when I was a graduate student, The Pragmatics of Human Communication by Paul Václavic, Janet Bevelas, and Don Jackson. The authors of that book, the content level of our communication, the thoughts and ideas that we speak and put to action. And they then contrast this with what they term the relationship level of communication, what our messages to one another and how we conceive and construct them and put them to action communicate about us, the us in any communication transaction. But to bring this aspect of our communication to the surface is to meta-communicate, to communicate about our communication. But people, other than general semanticists, because this is what we're all about, people do not tend to do this. They do not know how to do this. And even if they did, they do not without a communication education, without background in general semantics. They just don't know how to do it. As a result, we spend a great deal of energy in the oversimplified either-or semantic environments of our politics and governance, preaching to the converted. Or alternatively, we spend it in attempts to convert those who are the either to our or, with facts and other such constructions, even though to do so is folly. As Václavic and his colleagues would tell us, to do so is to ignore the fact that their side is based in an epistemic set, a history of evolved core attitudes and values and beliefs that are at the very foundation that makes up the self. And so to do so is to actually threaten that self, to threaten how we make coherent sense of ourselves and for ourselves, and thus how we make sense of and how we see our world. And so in our political discourse, we never talk about these things. Instead, we continue to debate over the fixed and oversimplified position within this political system, with the addition of our new media, have placed us and have brought us. And it seems we do so at our collective peril, and things seem to be getting worse. And so on that happy note, thank you.
Thank you very much, Thom.